for today would have been Emma from Multistory, and I'll share that presentation. We sort of looked internally within our team and thought about what would be meaningful to share with you guys. So I used to run a young people's programme that was Paul Hammond funded, so I thought about talking kind of a quick overview of that, what was meaningful engagement in that, and some of the things that was sort of learning from that as well that came out of it. So it was a 4-year programme with the Hepworth Wakefield. Paul Hammond Foundation funded it. I was a project post, so I was funded through the Paul Hammond Foundation but based at the Hepworth. And we had different strands to the programme. So similar to many of your probably learning programmes, we had like a drop-in session. We worked with 16 to 21-year-olds throughout that time. It was referral based. We worked a lot with the NHS, so we worked with GP surgeries as well as community partners to access the young people. The kind of only criteria was that they're not in formal education, training or employment. And then it was open to kind of which referral route we put them in, which we felt was most kind of meaningful for them. So the drop-in sessions were artist-led sessions. Originally the idea was that we were going to be drop-in, we found the young people didn't want to leave, no one left, there wasn't enough capacity for it to be drop-in like that. So it ended up just being kind of all-day sessions on a Friday. We also had extended courses, so they ran over 3 weeks with what sort of they ran with one artist most of the time, so they would work primarily with one practice, so they'd work with a photographer or a filmmaker or a printmaker over a sort of set period of time, and again through the same referral systems, the same referral routes. We had, so then another strand of the programme was that we hired a studio, so we worked with the Art House in Wakefield and they do art studios. We hired a studio and then we gave the young person a kind of key to the studio, and it was their studio throughout the duration of a residency. They worked exclusively one-to-one with a mentor. However, we also found that it was more beneficial for us to have other artists drop into that as well. And then at the end of that residency, which was usually about 3 months, they had an exhibition. We used the mentoring route the most to achieve Arts Award because it was easier. We had sustained engagement with the young person over and over again. How much they accessed the studio was completely up to them and around their own availability. The young person wasn't paid for their time though, everything was sort of volunteered or just the young person wanted to engage. So we worked around any of the commitments they had. We did artist shadowing, so we had the Hepworth Wakefield had a really great core team of artists. As Alex said earlier, not all artists are facilitators. We worked with very vulnerable young people and young people with mass scales of needs. So we also were keen to upskill new artists within that. Sometimes we did that by just having 2 artists deliver, or then kind of basing with an artist around the project, or we just did it as one-off shadow sessions, just to kind of ensure that the new artists and artists that were coming to the programme also, because working with a school was completely different to working with a group of young people that will very much tell you or walk out of your session if they don't like it. So we kind of had to ensure that we upskilled artists throughout the time as well. The taster sessions were really interesting because that was one of the things that made the programme really successful was collaboration. We did partnership work amazingly. So our referrals came in, we were never short of referrals, we were never short of young people. We go to a lot of galleries and work with a lot of other organisations that were saying, we just can't get young people in the door, we couldn't get young people out the door, like we were struggling with how much referrals we got. And I think that was because we did taster sessions, so we went into different places. We went into social workers, we went into the youth offending team, we went to the job centre, and we did taster sessions with either the employers or, for example, at the job centre, we would just set up a stall for a day, and anyone that came to sign on that day, if they were in 16 to 21-year-olds, they could be referred into our programme. And people were biting our hands off for taster sessions, and often, if we didn't have an artist or the budget for it, I would just go in, or we'd just have a member of the learning team go in with a bit of clay or a little bit of something and just have a kind of an example. And it was just the opportunity for someone to meet a face behind it and it not come through an organisation saying, we know of this thing, but actually I've met Sarah and I'm coming to meet Sarah next week at the Hepworth, or whatever it might be. We also did a lot in community meeting. So So rather than a big kind of barrier was coming into the building for the first time, these places aren't for me, I'm not welcome here, I don't know how to get through the door, I don't know where the bus sort of drops me. So we'd meet in the centre of town in coffee shops or places that were familiar and then walk down to the gallery or find a way to access the gallery kind of together. So that was again another route in that supported the kind of initial things. So we did external groups, so we had, as part of the funding bid, we had quite high numbers to hit. And I was really aware that the work wasn't going to be sustainable or meaningful, or we weren't going to actually change any kind of impact on young people in a positive way. So one of the ways that we hit numbers and kind of met funding criteria in that sense was to tap into groups that pre-existed. So for example, the Youth Offending Team do a massive summer programme, and in that time they work with hundreds of young offenders over the summer, and they already have groups set up for that. We came in and delivered and parachuted in for all of their groups. So we hit criteria. Whilst we did that, we then also had really meaningful, sustainable things like the residencies and the mentoring, where we could kind of measure our change a bit more holistically and long term in terms of evaluation, rather than just saying, well, we know that X amount of young people didn't access our service, but these young people actually, we were able to measure resilience and things like that over a long time. We set up with pupil referral units. It was really interesting because we set up the partnerships with pupil referral units quite easily, and then when we were actually in situ, they had a big move around and they lost lots of funding, and some of them became academies, so there was a big switch over in policies and strategies. However, we were able to kind of keep up with the engagement throughout that time, but we just had to be really flexible, move buildings, swap to different schools. The young people had to be ferried through the schools, but they organised that. But that was only because we had that investment already. It would have been very hard to come in during that transition stage. Again, with the pupil referral units, we were really careful on what artists we used, what materials we used, and ensured that the young people that we worked with had some say over what was programmed. So we would set things up, and then we would sort of say to them, what did you like, what didn't you like, what would you change, and they would have a bit more agency over what practices. And in reality, a lot of them would say that they don't want to do photography or they don't want to touch a camera, but actually once we kind of set that up, they were really great, and they don't know what they like until they've kind of experienced it. So just ensuring we had taster sessions for the pupil referral units was really important. Set up a creative learning network, and again, I think this was instrumental in the kind of sustainability of it. The Creative Learning Network was just a CPD for other professionals working in the sector, but it was also open to the community sector, so it was open to social workers, it was open to teachers, it was open to yacht workers, community anchors, GPs, if they wanted to come and they were referring to the service. What happened was we had a really eclectic group of people in a room, including other arts organisations, but then also community anchors. And there was just great conversations. There would be an artist that facilitated throughout that time, but really that was more about other people saying, hey, we've got this programme, can you refer into this? And it was just this knowledge sharing opportunity. We worked a lot with Yorkshire Sculpture Park for that, but we did it across different venues. The legacy of that ran for 3 years, because the first year I just wanted to set it up, and then it ran for 3 years. The legacy of that is it's now run by a charity organisation that has a community allotment, so they now run it and continued it outside of the funding. And it just made it easier because it also made it exit strategies a lot easier. We knew of other services that were appropriate, we knew of referral systems, and it didn't matter because we knew we had a contact within that, so that was really helpful, or someone else did. So potentially there's a safeguarding issue that we want more support with, potentially there's an exit strategy we want more support with, a new group, another thing we can refer into, so it was really helpful in that. The kind of way we measured things, the evaluation side of it was probably the most important side that also gets really kind of diluted in the arts sometimes. We used the 5 Ways to Wellbeing, which was set up through the NHS, but Wakefield Council used it, so we knew it was a robust system in how we measured each part of wellbeing, and then we looked at the soft core skills like confidence, resilience, self-esteem. But they were measured with really tangible examples, so it wasn't just like, we've seen this young person smile more. It was more like, this young person now gets public transport, this young person is now working. And we ensured, I think, out of the 3 years, every time that a young person exited, they only exited the programme if what they were exiting was kind of to another opportunity. So they didn't leave until they had somewhere else to go or something else to go to. So that was a really big part of my job, was ensuring that that was set up and that there was something for them to go to. And it wasn't another art group, it had to be something that was kind of a step up and impact growth from what they were already doing. Arts Award's a really interesting one because it was, as much as it was probably helped secure our funding and embedded in the programme, it was a real challenge. And it actually created a system that we had to adhere to alongside the funding that made it quite challenging, especially for some of the pupil referral units where we didn't get the same young person. We got a young person come to 4 of 16 sessions, but they wanted to finish their Arts Award and they wanted to do it and we wanted to help them. And we had to kind of set up extra groups, and there was a lot of staff capacity around just trying to get young people through Arts Award. So it was just a really interesting one because it did help support our funding. There was beautiful outcomes, there was beautiful exhibitions, but it was also a real struggle. And for some of the young people, it meant that they all had to operate at a certain level that they couldn't or necessarily operate at. So it took staff and artists time, as probably many of you know from doing it. Yeah, that's kind of an overview of that programme. But if there's any questions or queries about it, it was a really interesting and inspirational thing to work on. So yeah, we thought we'd just share it with you guys. Was there any questions or anything else?
Yeah, so once the 4-year cycle ended and those participants went on to work with the other partners, did the HEPA continue to run the programme?
So really interestingly, well, and what I will say is it wasn't like the same participants for 4 years. We just, whenever we felt that young person was sort of ready to leave, or we felt that they'd got everything they could from the programme, we'd pass it on. So what I can tell you, I'm not sure exactly, but the HEPWES and YSP have now just looked at getting some funding together, which would be like a shared post for a different youth programme, using the report from the Paul Hamlin Foundation, which I wrote just after. So so I think that's the kind of aim. They struggled in the pandemic because of sort of cuts and things like that, but they definitely will have a new youth programme. But I think what was nice with the legacy was the art house who had hosted the studio. We just paid for the studio because they saw a lot of the outcome. They created their own youth programme that was similar in terms of the mentoring side of it with the residency. The Creative Learn Network's now run by Bridget, who showed you allotments. They run the creative, it's got a different name, but they run the network now. So there was lots of little ways it kind of continued in its own right, but without the funding we need, I guess.
Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah. Was there anything else?
Thank you.
And was there kind of peer mentoring between the artistic practitioners and the kind of wider health professionals?
Well, it was such a gap. It was such a gap, and I guess now social prescription's a little bit more on the map, and people are understanding it a little bit more. So it was such a huge gap, which I think was why the Creative Learn Network, where there was a young worker, and also what we also did, which was really interesting, which was you got saying about an art therapist. One of the charities had an art therapist, and then they just outsourced them to us, but we didn't pay for it. They just took our space, but they started to take on our young people as well. So there's lots of crossover like that. But yeah, there wasn't as much mentoring, but what I will say is a lot of the artists felt that they really skilled up in community work and went into more outreach side of things as a result of it, I would say, where before they were very much their own practice or schools, and then a lot of them went on. One of the community centres still works with 2 of the artists that they did a few years ago, but freelance, so there's some nice crossovers there. But yeah. Well, I think if Alex is ready, that gives us nice time for but before we go, and before we probably go down to the tour, because once we kind of go down to the tour, then some people might need to get off or anything like that. I was just, is there any kind of reflections, Hannah, that you felt that we should cover? The only thing I will say is that as Emma couldn't be here, we're looking kind of December, January time running another alumni event, but it'll be online this time. We may be able to get Emma to do what she would have done today at that event. But yeah, just another opportunity really for everyone to meet online. There was a lot of people who couldn't make it today for travel reasons and for other variables. So having it online is more and more of an accessible and looking forward potentially doing both the in-person alumni event and then one online each time. And we'd really welcome anyone who wants to share about their own practice or their own kind of things other companies as a result of Extend, then to come and share and tell us about that as well. Was there anything else, Han, that you felt that we should?
Or just to say that in the next probably month you might see the next Extend cohort going live, so please do share that with colleagues in terms of the leadership programme itself. Obviously the network continues expanding forever and ever. I think that was it really, just really nice to have you all here, and yeah, stay in touch with us, let us know what you're up to in between these meetups, because we really love to hear about it.
Yeah,
James, is there anything you want to say?
No, just really lovely to see everybody, and thank you so much for hosting us. And it's been brilliant having all those presentations, but also fabulous questions. So thank you.
Yeah, so we're going to go and see the Carback exhibition, and then everyone's just free to go. But if you want to leave stuff in here and then come back up, that's fine. The room will be open.
Can I ask a quick question about Extend? So is there a network or something, a way for us to communicate with each other across the different years?
We've talked about this. We've talked about having kind of like what platform's best, and whether it's like a private group or whether it's like a LinkedIn thing, and what's the kind of best, I guess, platform moving forward if people want to communicate. We always suggest that people share their emails or let us know if they're comfortable with it, and we can then include people's emails in the thread, so that you can access each other. But yeah, it would be nice as a way to just maybe share as a platform rather than it just being an email or an Eventbrite link. So maybe we might look at it being a LinkedIn group.
Yeah, I mean for us we did it during the pandemic, so it was all online, there was none of that face-to-face, so I don't feel like we've got as strong a bond with the people that we did the course with that previous years might do.
Yeah.
So something that's a little bit more structured, that has some, discussion points or something to get us started, and certainly across the years as well, because, we've, apart from today, we've never met.
Yeah.
Might be really, well, I think it would be really useful to me anyway.
And you're not the only person that said
reaching
that.
out to people otherwise.
Yeah. Well, no, you're not the only person that said that 100%, and I'm far too old to talk about threads, but maybe that might be a room for us moving forward. But yeah, and it's something that maybe we can actually look at making now, because the course is now just going to be online for the foreseeable future. So there is an aspect that people lose out on. There is a humanism that we lack, and no matter whatever way we slice it, essentially. There is a humanism.
Yeah, and I suppose, so I think we can ask everyone that we're in touch with, if there are people that who've taken part in Extend, who you think are part of this group, let us know, because people move rapidly.
Yeah, they always give us their work email and then leave.
Yeah,
Thanks for helping me grow, bye.
We have done tons of research, but actually there are some people we're not quite in touch with.
Yeah.
But actually what we found with moving the programme online, obviously that happened because of the pandemic, and many of you have done it in that way. What was fab about that, which we weren't expecting, is it did become much more affordable, and lots of the barriers that colleagues would have experienced if you live more remotely or have other responsibilities
like that,
were removed, and that felt really important. So, but that's why we retain that aspect of it.
But yeah, in response to it, we're definitely going to develop something and then let you know.
Yes.
If you have suggestions of platforms, please do.
Yes,
So
we'd be
pointers in the right
Our cohort, actually, we have a messenger group. So
Yeah,
you
people
can
have
actually get a
made-
message to all of ours in one.
Yes,
message
that'd be
on
great.
I mean,
Yeah.
if you're struggling to reach some people anyway, LinkedIn is quite a good option.
Yeah, it
because
is.
people are already on there, and then you can find them through Extend, and as the network builds, they'll find us rather than the other way round.
Yeah, it's actually quite a big group now. It's 160 people. Some
Mm-hmm.
people manage to be very aloof.
Yeah, someone tried.
Even LinkedIn, we're all detectives at work.
Yeah, someone tried to add me to a WhatsApp group of a recent cohort, and I was just like, nope. Thanks.